My brother hired a private detective to prove I was the biggest failure in our family. So, our family had to hold an emergency meeting during dinner. My two siblings and I grew up in this charming tiny town, and I am the middle sibling. Everyone there is acquainted with one another, which is sometimes an advantage and sometimes a drawback. My dad is the kind of man who works extremely hard all the time, but he's not the kind to talk about his feelings or anything. And now he's considering retiring and hanging up his boots. Conversely, my mother is the total opposite. She has always taken care of the house and has adhered to the traditional values that she was raised with. Both of them come from devout and conservative backgrounds. I cherish them. I mean, they're my parents. However, I've always felt that I fell short of their expectations. It hurts a little that they appear to view me as the family letdown. My elder brother is the next in line. He truly is the family's golden boy. He married a pretty but reserved woman at the age of 40, and he settled down. She seems to be very silent and lacks anything to say. Their two sons are passionate about sports, especially the kind where you could get a few bruises. They can be a bit of a handful and over the top, to be honest. Definitely not the quiet, collected ones. My brother works as a car salesman at a nearby dealership. He appears to believe that it is his responsibility to mentor me in doing what he has decided to do as an adult. However, it seems more like he regards me as like I'm something he can't handle by himself, as if I'm in continual need of assistance and ought to be incredibly appreciative of whatever attention he offers. He gives advice all the time, but it usually comes off as him bragging about how wonderful he thinks his life is. He enjoys taking pride in his large home, expensive vehicles, and trophy-like wife. He continues to construct a picture of this ideal existence, talking about his athletic children, his powerboat and his ATVs. I feel like the odd one out even more because of that. I was the child in school who was too sensitive, often moved to tears and always came up with reasons why things didn't work out for her. School was really difficult. I was not one of the tough, sporty people. I was not one of those huge, strong guys that like playing rough and tumble. Rather, I became the object of jokes and was never truly included in anything, which made me feel even more alienated. I get it completely. I have asthma, much like a lot of other youngsters in my community. The really bad news is this. My folks don't think asthma is a serious medical condition. In addition, I have struggled with depression for as long as I can remember, and I was never the type of child who could throw a football straight or run down a field. This did not alleviate my parents' incessant comparative remarks. They would frequently comment on how I wasn't as intelligent or gregarious as my older brother. I had a difficult time and graduated from high school with a 2.5 GPA, which is mediocre. I started college after managing to build up some cash, but things didn't work out and I left in my second year. This choice became a hot topic of discussion, not in a positive sense. Next is my younger sister. She was essentially the family's princess, and because I moved out when she was a teenager, I don't know much about her. My feelings for her are mostly based on my observations of her as an adult. She's only a little overindulged. She's not a nasty person at all. She often treats me the same way my brother and parents do, most likely because it's less difficult than being the intended victim. She married at the age of 19, had a lavish wedding, and currently has 3 children. Her middle child is the one with whom I identify the most. She's also the middle kid, so I suppose I see a little bit of myself in her because she is frequently teased, perhaps because her challenges are similar to mine. I feel as though I understand hers more. I truly started to embrace my nerdy introverted side when I graduated from college. I was hired by a comic book and game store in my neighborhood, which I really enjoyed working at until it closed more than 7 years ago. My parents still discuss it like I work there now in spite of that, but meeting another geek with big plans made my time there worthwhile. We co-founded a tech support company that prospered greatly. My business partner eventually made the decision to include the sale of our company to a bigger company in the agreement. Cash and stock options were used to buy me out, and the stocks turned out to be quite profitable. I made several wise investments and even launched a couple additional side ventures, many of which were very successful. I try not to boast too much, but I have amassed assets that are valued at more than $1 million. I now lead a brand new private startup as its CTO. I'm financially successful, but I lead a quite modest life. I have been driving a 15-year-old Saturn. All of the furniture in my modest 2-bedroom home in a great neighborhood is second-hand. I'm not dating anyone right now. I visit my therapist on a regular basis and lead a busy life. Fighting alcoholism is one of my continuous struggles, which is difficult because, similar to my melancholy and asthma, my parents don't think it's genuine. They believe it to be entirely mental. Despite the ups and downs in my life, I've been able to forge a successful route for myself, even if it's not what other people would anticipate or comprehend. Every Sunday night, my parents want me to be at their house for supper, but it's not just a brief journey. Since they reside on the opposite side of the state, it will take them 90 to 120 minutes to get there each trip. That consumes almost half of my weekend. Nevertheless, they seem to believe that I wouldn't have anything better to do with my time if I were unmarried and what my brother likes to call a mental case. These meals might be somewhat difficult. I sit there for 3 hours getting unsolicited advice on how to be a good adult, get married, and have a family, or I listen to forced comments on my brother's most recent huge sale at the car dealership. I can always count on it to be the talk of the table the next time I miss one of these dinners. They've never called me a moocher explicitly, but the insinuation is there, which is annoying and puzzling. When I speak with my therapist, I must admit that I frequently wonder why I continue to attend these events. Up until lately, my family has either reduced or distorted every success I've had into something unpleasant. Back home, everyone still believed that I worked at the now-closed game store. My brother had a good career and was perceived as more mature and outgoing than me, so people constantly looked down on me from my previous retail work. Because of this difference, it was difficult for me to tell my family members back home about the real situation of my life and my accomplishments. Comics and games were usually dismissed as juvenile pastimes. I truly am an expert in technology, therefore I always try to bring it up. My brother used to talk over me, acting as though I was ignorant. Usually, I just listened to him babble. Even though I could tell he was talking gibberish, I was afraid to correct him. I didn't want to have to defend my area of expertise, which would ultimately force me to elaborate on my work. I believed that deep down, I was afraid that they wouldn't respect my career and that it would cause them to view me differently overall. I'll admit that I've been a bit of a disaster, but last month, everything was different. My brother managed to obtain some of my personal data in some way. In reality, he engaged a private investigator to conduct what he purported to be a background investigation on my employment. I had a feeling that he was preparing an intervention with my parents. What they found totally caught them off guard. They discovered my true financial worth, that I wasn't residing in some dilapidated apartment, among other sensitive information, in particular because security is a part of my job. After connecting the dots, I even received alerts about certain fraudulent efforts to obtain my credit report. I deduced the cause of the incident. Everything has come to light as a result of this revelation, and I now have to deal with my family's unanticipated change of opinion of me. It's a lot to take in, especially in light of the misconceptions and undervaluation that have pervaded my relationship with them for such a long time. My family's finances were investigated by the same private detective business because I was so incensed over the invasion of my privacy. My brother was, as it turned out, living much over his means. Investigation results included calls for domestic disturbances, a file with Child Protective Services, and multiple prior arrests for DWI and public intoxication. He was juggling 3 mortgage loans on his home and was having trouble making his scheduled IRS back payments even though there were no active charges at the moment. His credit was a complete mess. My parents, on the other hand, had simple lives and had very little possessions other than what I already knew. Sensible and realistic about money, I didn't even bother to see how my sister was doing. I was prepared to face them and possibly cause a rift when I showed up at the next family meal. But the mood I entered was very different from what I had envisioned. My parents started to treat me like the golden kid, with an odd kind of veneration. My brother was clearly bothered by this change. Dinner was halfway done when he lost his cool. He began bragging about recent sales commissions and a purported promotion in an effort to retake some ground. I only thank him for these accomplishments while gently bringing up his debt, IRS issues, and stretched credit status. In other words, I celebrate his successes while drawing attention to the truth of his financial catastrophe. It was all really strangely depressing. My parents' abrupt shift in conduct toward me felt forced and fake, which made the already difficult family dynamic much more uncomfortable. When I showed him a copy of the report, he initially disputed everything, but I pointed him that it was him who had unintentionally recommended the agency by employing it to look into me. There was a moment, I have to admit, when that felt good. My parents were obviously in on it too as they responded with dramatic astonishment and reprimanded him. My social security number was required in order for him to obtain the report. The entire scene was quite unnerving. Neither the revelation nor the argument that followed were enjoyable. My contempt for my family was solidified as it brought to light their cowardice and greed. They began putting each other under the bus throughout the course of the following hour, accusing each other, and I made an effort to keep silent. Every now and then, they directed their annoyance at me, and I would shrug or give a casual one-word response. My brother's wife, my sister's husband, and the 5 children watched in disbelief as a family fell apart like never before. Our get-togethers are usually unremarkable and predictable. My mom would strike up a discussion, my dad would grumble in response, my sister would provide updates whenever she could, and my brother and his wife would brag about their lives. There had never been a breakdown like this at our family feasts. The family dinner was turbulent, to put it mildly, with the customary subtly pointed jabs about how I should look up to my brother and be a real man, leaving everyone at the table in stunned silence as they struggled with the sudden exposure of deep-seated issues that had long been simmering beneath the surface of our familial relations. My brother, Dad and I got into a boisterous argument over the conversation. They dug up every scrap of old family turmoil from 3 decades ago and argued over who was to blame for everything. It was similar to witnessing the events unfold in real time, completely free for anybody. In those moments, every bad thought I had about my family seemed to be confirmed. You would think that I would feel some sort of victory for justice, but in all honesty, I felt awful. I came to the realization that I might not have handled things well. I knew they were bad people, but frankly, what was I hoping to achieve by making my brother's transgressions public? I had not intended for his kids to know about his history, but now they did. When my brother Red became enraged and yelled at me, the night came to a head. He accused me of being the cause of all the family's issues, saying harsh things like, "You should have never been born." Not only were his remarks startling at the time, but I also saw my parents attempt, in a frenzy I had never seen before, to calm him down. They tried to step in, but they never really took responsibility for the way they had treated me over the years. I felt both vindication and intense sadness at the same time because it was a clear and painful reminder of the serious problems in our family dynamics. I got up and said I was done with these dinners and that I wouldn't be returning when I could take it no more. At that point, my parents made another accusation against me. They said that I was refusing to assist a niece or nephew who was ill, implying that I had the ability to heal them, but chose to ignore them. I was unaware of this. No one has ever contacted me for assistance or informed me of any such problem. I didn't question it, but I have a sneaking suspicion that they were making it up as they went along. Rather, I reminded them, I believed you thought so. I continued to work at a comic book shop. I'd emphasized several times that the place had closed down in 2011, but they never seemed to realize how disgusting and disgraceful the way they had altered our family history was. Feeling overwhelmed and irritated, I simply left and took a car home. I'm left feeling conflicted right now. I feel betrayed that they are aware of my wealth, and I know that this will put pressure on me to repay them, particularly because I've witnessed them treat my brother in the same way. However, I do recognize and value the fact that my parents met my fundamental necessities as a child: food, drink, and shelter. I'll have to tread cautiously through this complicated maze of thankfulness, resentment, and newly established limits, especially since they now have expectations based on my financial success. I'll probably need some time to process this dynamic shift, maybe with the assistance of my therapist. It's obvious that going forward, establishing strict boundaries will be essential. To be honest, I wasn't my family's favorite child. That's why growing up was difficult, even if my parents never physically abused me. When my brother mistreated me, they did little to stop him. When he used to hit, kick, and say incredibly nasty things to me, my parents would just act like nothing was wrong and ignore it. They don't even think that verbal abuse is acceptable. What I'm trying to say is that while verbal abuse is awful in and of itself, it hurt a lot after spending so much time battling this. There's a limit to what I can handle at this time. Even though I know they are my family, I feel as like I must permanently distance myself from them. I wish them nothing but the best. I simply believe that moving on and starting a new chapter on my own will benefit me more than staying around them. I wonder what would happen if I find a particular someone like a girlfriend and we decide to be married and start a family in the future. Then, how will I address matters with my family? I'm attempting to understand it because it has the potential to become quite complex. If I'm not actually talking to my old family anymore, how do I introduce my new family to them? I have a lot of questions about that. Before you read the update, let me offer a comment. Proceed. Not in contact. They only wanted you around to make themselves feel better, which is why they only wanted you around in the first place. Now, they just want you around so they can take part of your money. Your family does not represent who you are. I mean, they're all bad. You're not a failure. In fact, you seem like a really nice guy who was treated unfairly in your familial situation. Turn off their phone and go on with your life. I believe you performed a fantastic job. Cut back on your family's contact as much as you'd like. You are aware that all they want is your money. Therefore, you are free to interact with them only on your own terms. To help you transition into a life without them holding you back, keep in contact with your therapist. Avoid making touch. Indeed, if you're able to move to a different city and pack your belongings in order to start again, a lot of people are at odds with their families when it comes to dating. You're not alone in having to make such severe decisions. It can be awkward to explain this to a prospective partner, particularly if they have close family ties. When the moment is appropriate, you will start a new family. There are a few things I believe you should do in the interim. Place a security freeze on your credit accounts if you haven't already. You might want to think about alerting them if your brother obtained this information about you using resources from the vehicle dealership. If they found out they were involved in fraud, I doubt they would be happy about it. Get a lawyer as well. Even though you're young, Tragedies do happen, and your parents are currently the default next of kin and will receive everything. Go to someone else if you would rather view your assets, even if you don't care about it. Put it in writing as quickly as you can. Lastly, locate a reputable counselor. In the upcoming months, you might go through some grief. It will be beneficial to discuss it with a specialist. After that huge dinner time showdown, update dude, returning home by car seemed like leaving a war zone. Only my thoughts and I were zipping through the night on the peaceful road. As soon as I came into my driveway, I realized that something needed to shift. I had to stop hosting these dinners for the family. Not unless I lose my mind. I remained to myself during the next 2 weeks, concentrating on my career and mental health. The technology devices and comics I had lying about my house weren't merely eye candy, they served as my haven. In order to figure out how to distance myself from my family without alienating them entirely, I intensified my therapy sessions. Dr. Bennett, my therapist, was invaluable in helping me establish boundaries. He guided me through techniques that were more akin to creating a fort than erecting a wall. As the temperature increased, my thoughts began to stray into the future, namely in regards to relationships. After spending some time alone myself and being single, I began to feel as though meeting someone wonderful was not only feasible, but also likely. And then Eva appeared in my life straight out of a comic book. At a tech conference, we got together. I became engrossed in her lecture about cybersecurity, not only by the subject, but also due to her charm. She understood me, was intelligent and grounded. She also had a love-centered perspective on families, but with steely limits. The unspoken issue when Ava's situation became more serious was how to introduce her to my family's circus. We talked about how to manage it over pizza on many an evening. We decided to keep family get-togethers informal, visible, and brief. Was even willing to support me, which changed everything. Our first events were coffee dates. It was with Eva that I reintroduced myself to the family get-togethers. The first few times were really awkward, as one could expect. My parents were extremely courteous, cautious around me as if I could suddenly go away. My brother, on the other hand, seemed to be trying to say a million things, but was having trouble finding the right words. However, my sister and her children were a welcome change of pace. Ava immediately won over her middle child, who was so much like me. We started to get into these coffee dates. They resembled quick trips into family territory, swift entry and exit. I was able to reconnect without being sucked into the turmoil. Surprisingly, it began to function. My family adapted to this new arrangement gradually. Maybe recognizing that this was the only option to maintain me in their lives, they started to respect my boundaries. Even as I got nearer, I began to consider the long term more. How might our future appear? I saw us creating something strong. A loving and respectful family foundation, not duty and shame, but I was aware that there would be challenges along the way. Eva and I were strolling by the lake one summer evening when we discussed the possibility of moving in together. I became aware of how far I had gone from feeling abandoned by my family to being able to stand on my own with a true understanding of myself. It seemed to be day and night. I'm cautiously enthusiastic about the future. I'm aware that the journey ahead will be rocky. Heck, crater-sized potholes might exist, but I think I'm ready with Ava. It was more than simply self-preservation that drove me to set those boundaries with my family. It was about creating space for new friendships and a happy future for me. Regarding the Sunday dinners, they remained scheduled, but now they are at my convenience. I go occasionally and sometimes I don't. When I do, I take Ava with me and we tackle whatever comes up together. Although it's far improved, it's still not flawless. It's about striking that balance, maintaining harmony without becoming overwhelmed by it. Second tale. Hello to all of you. Please be gentle with me. I'm still learning how to share anything online. There's a lot going on in my life right now, so I want to share everything with you. First, let's talk about the principal players. I'm over there. Daisy, my soon-to-be ex-wife, Mario, our son, and Peach, our daughter. We are currently experiencing a difficult separation that is rapidly developing into an extremely harsh divorce. This is the tale then. Daisy and I are leaving together, primarily because she came to terms with her bisexuality early this year. She told me outright that she wanted our marriage to be open. That thought didn't sit well with me at all. When I discovered Daisy had slept with my coworker, who also happens to be one of my best friends, the issue became even more confusing. You can imagine how awkward and painful that was. I'm a police officer. It seemed like a betrayal from both the workplace and the home. We were unable to be together after that, so I took some time off to clear my thoughts. Daisy made a great effort to keep us together at first. Things took a terrible turn when it became apparent that I was adamant about not expanding our marriage, despite her pleas and arguments to the contrary. Daisy's perspective entirely shifted. Things became pretty bad when she started acting spitefully. The last thing I wanted was for her to start treating our children like pawns in this whole situation. Daisy began telling Peach that I no longer loved them, which was why she had to leave our house, that I loathed them and was severing our family. Hearing that was devastating, especially in light of how perplexed and depressed Peach must be feeling. Daisy currently resides at her mother's house where our children often pay her visits. Daisy and her new companion attempt to make everything look like a huge exciting vacation throughout these trips. They lavished Peach and Mario with toys and candy, presumably in an attempt to play the cool parents and turn them against me. In addition to the emotional turmoil, Daisy is disagreeing with me on every single sensible matter. We are at odds about everything. How much money one of us should be making to support the other and who should inherit what possessions. What was the most difficult part? How are we going to divide up our time between Mario and Peach? Every agreement we attempt to establish is met with resistance from her, and it seems as though she is only making things more difficult for herself. Daisy, my soon-to-be ex-wife, has been adding to the complexity lately. It's unfair that she has been telling our children things that paint me as the villain. Peach and Mario, for instance, have been inquiring as to whether or not I dislike Daisy's new companion. For whatever reason, it appears that AP loves them more than I do. Let's call them AP. Their minds are seriously disturbed by this kind of conversation. I was working on something major at work a few weeks ago. I was attempting to get promoted from police officer to homicide detective, which takes a lot more overtime. Daisy and I therefore decided that the children would stay with her during this hectic period, and on the weekends, when it was time for them to head to Daisy's, I would drop by. As I gave Mario the bag, I packed a large one for him. "Are you taking us away because you hate us?" he said, tears welling up in his eyes as he gazed at me. "Like your mother says?" It was a heartbreaking time. I gave him a big hug and told him it wasn't true. I really did love him. I went to see them last weekend, and even though I tried, it was still weird. It was quite difficult. They didn't say much to me. It stung a lot that it felt like they didn't even want to see me. I couldn't have another chance to speak with them until today. They both looked so dejected as I scooped them up. I was able to speak with them, and it was evident that Peach in particular is struggling. Daisy seems to be making it difficult for her to express her love for me, even if she still does. I'm attempting to determine the best course of action to do in order to minimize the harm to the children because it's a challenging scenario. When things in a family get twisted like way, it can be difficult. She is struggling a lot because she feels like she can't love me.